everybody, and welcome to the Women's Soccer Show. I'm Sara.
And I'm Allie.
And this is our spooky Halloween episode, I guess. Technically, this comes out a day after Halloween, but I'm working this into the conversation because Allie and I just had a riveting conversation about Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. And, of course, the controversial candy corn.
Candy corn is gross and an abomination to all things that's sweet.
I absolutely love candy corn, but I had a hot take, I think, that... And listen, if you want to fast forward through this part, that's fine, but it's only going to be like 30 seconds of us talking about candy, and then we'll get to soccer, I promise. The pumpkin candy corns, you would think that they're going to taste better because it's just more candy corn. It's bigger. But actually, it's just too much candy corn. It's like too concentrated, and you can only have a little bit at a time because it's so sugary. So I actually think the pumpkins aren't as good. Same with Reese's. This is how we got onto Reese's. The Reese's pumpkins, not as good because they're bigger, so they end up having more peanut butter. And then the peanut butter to chocolate ratio is totally thrown off, and I don't like it.
There we go, people.
I do like it. I'll still eat it, but I feel strongly about this.
And, some sadder news. This is my last show for the Women's Soccer Show. For 3 weeks.
Oh my God. You cannot do that.
Trick or treat, people. No, yeah, I am away for the next 2 weeks, definitely, possibly 3 weeks. Going living my best life. So you will have a wonderful co-host with Sara.
And tell everybody where you're going.
I'm going to Japan.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. But don't worry, everybody. You are in safe, wonderful hands. We've brought in a guest co-host who you know, who you love, who you've heard before, who is also English.
Yeah, we've got to keep that balance, people. We have to have one American, one English person. So,
I'm pumped. Amy O'Connor is going to be joining us for the next few weeks.
Yeah, so thank you, Amy, for stepping in for me, and I will, I'm going to some football while I'm out in Japan, so I will blog about that, and you can see how the Japanese do it in their league.
Right, so let's get into it. This week was international break, and we have a lot to talk about, so we don't get to kick it off with fantasy, because obviously we're playing WSL fantasy. There was no WSL, but I do think now that this past weekend has happened, I think we should play fantasy for the next international tournament that happens, because I think that'll be a blast for us.
Yes, and also if you want international, there is Champions League fantasy as well. We have a league set up, so now it's Champions League's proper. Go to She Plays Fantasy and it'll be all there, our league for Champions League.
All right, let's get into it. International, plus stick around because we've got a really great interview for you at the end of this episode. We've edited it down for time, but if you want the full chunk of it after you listen to it at the end of this episode, head over to our Patreon.
So we have to start off with the two big international matches, which is USA versus Colombia. The first match ended in a tie 0-0, and then the second game, the US took it 3-0. As our resident Yank, Sara, thoughts, feelings, and opinions on these two matches.
Well, this is interesting because you and I were going back and forth because you were telling me that I had some U.S. bias for wanting to talk about the U.S. first and make this kind of like the big first subject. And, well, I'm not here to say that I don't have U.S. bias. I do think that the U.S. are just objectively the most interesting entity to talk about right now because they're some of the least settled, that they've ever been, and across the major teams in international football. So I was really looking forward to these games because also Colombia was such a blast in the World Cup. Anybody that listened to our World Cup coverage knows how much both Allie and I absolutely adored this team. So I was also pumped to see Colombia. So maybe we can start with Colombia and then we'll get into the US.
I was going to say, let's talk about Colombia because they were one of my highlight teams in the World Cup. They played with such passion and fire and vigor.
And Linda Caicedo just set the world on fire, really.
Yeah, it made me sad that England had to play them in the World Cup because I was like, no, I want them to go further because
it didn't make me sad. I was rooting for Colombia.
Of course you were. But I think it was really good, and they really held their own against the US. Like, they really held their own.
More than held their own. Like, I feel like it's important for us to say, I mean, Colombia did better in the World Cup than the U.S. did. So if anybody's surprised by the fact that Colombia played the U.S. so well, you shouldn't be, simply because of that, because this is a very up-and-coming team. But yeah, I think they did more than just hold their own. I would say that it was a really strong performance from them in that first game. ended in a 0-0 draw. And I think that really the storyline of the second game for Colombia is just that they didn't start their best 11. And that's not taking credit away from the U.S. That's just saying, that's where Colombia is as a team right now. They have an incredible best 11. Where they are is that they need to know who else is a difference maker, who else is a playmaker. So they now need to work out who can come off the bench and impact.
Yeah, they need their second best 11.
Exactly.
Also, on a more serious note, it's time to pay them, Colombian Federation, because we had to do it with Jamaica and call them out publicly to get them to actually pay Jamaica. So I'm starting that revolution now with Colombia. Pay your players, Colombia.
To say the least. I mean, I would bet money that a lot of people were in that stadium to see Linda Caicedo. I turned on that TV, and she was the thing that I was probably the most excited to watch. And that's above the U.S. But I guess with how the U.S. were playing, it wasn't that hard. So we're not going to dive into let's get into the USA. We're not going to dive into the game specifically because I think that there's just a lot of topics that transcend both games. So let's hit the big topics, Allie. Were you able to watch these games?
I was. I didn't watch them live just because the timing was sucky. But I did watch them on repeat. And I think the big talking point for both games has to be like the youth that are coming through the US, like especially in the second game, changing out players for the younger players that are really proving their worth and are really setting the world on fire really was the difference maker for the US, having those players. We've talked about Mia Fishel a lot on this show because she is definitely up and coming and up there. Got her first goal in like her second cap, which is outstanding. You've got Alyssa Thompson, again, who's 18. You forget how young Alyssa Thompson is. She's 18. You've got players that are already steadfast regulars like Naomi Girma, who is a young player who is establishing herself in that back line. I will say that little sweet story between Girma and Sauber about the number 4 jersey and about Girma ringing up Becky being like, can I please have the 4 when we play? And Becky's like, it's not mine to give away. Of course you can have it. And then at the very end of the interview, Girma went, but Becky is number 4, just so we're clear.
As if I could love Becky Sauerbrunn anymore. Then that happens. I mean, yeah, let's start with a young talent. Specifically, I mean, there's so much that I was excited for, but I think everybody, and we talked about this weeks ago, that we wanted to see Mia Fishel and Jaden Shaw on this national team. And I was really pumped to see, obviously, Emma Vignola got her first cap in the last camp, didn't see the field this camp, but there's a lot of young talent here. And the story really, in terms of young talent coming out of these two games, was Mia Fishel and Jaden Shaw. And you nailed it. The moment they were on the field, within 30 seconds of that second half starting, because they didn't play until the second half of the second game, within 30 seconds, those two had combined for almost a goal. And it's not just that it was creating an opportunity. It was exciting. It was fast-paced soccer. It was the soccer that you want to tune in and see, which, let's just call a spade, is not what the U.S. have been playing up until now. And this second game was the best we'd seen the U.S. play in a long time. And I think a lot of it was because of the youth.
Yeah, and like you've got some young, almost veterans now, but you look at like Trinity Rodman, who has come on and is just a sure fire starter now and is really establishing herself. And again, the way they all play together is like, you know what, children are our future.
Absolutely. I mean, the creativity alone is just, that's part of what was missing. But I want to bring something up that I think I've been seeing a lot on social media. So if you're listening to this and you're not on social media, A, I'm jealous of you, and B, don't worry, I'm going to tell you about it. So people are some U.S. women's national team fans have watched this game, seen the young talent, and I would say that they're a little bit up in arms about the fact that this young talent, like Mia Fishel, like Jaden Shaw, weren't called up earlier. And why are they not getting a lot of minutes? Why did we have to wait until the second half of the second game to put them in? And this might be a little controversial, but I actually very much disagree with that idea of, they're the talent, so put them in immediately because they're who we want to see. They're the future of this team. Yes, to both of those. But there is a benefit to slowly easing players into the international scene and not throwing them in the fire. And that's actually how the US used to operate. And that all kind of got thrown out with Vlatko Andonovski. He just started throwing people into the fire. Alyssa Thompson got drafted. Great. We're going to put her in and we're going to start her. She's going to get her first cap. Thrown right into the fire. And that's not always the best thing for these players' development. It's kind of like how Serena is handling Lauren James over in England. Yes, she is a caliber player that can and should be just thrown in and playing 90 minutes the moment she steps, into camp. But that's not what happened. She is slowly easing her into the game so that she can develop as much as possible. It's good for their development. And I really credit Twyla Kilgore, the interim head coach for the U.S., and we'll come on to talking about head coaches. But I credit her a lot with this mentality shift that I think that we're in the middle of seeing with the U.S. And that is two-pronged. It's exactly what I just mentioned. It's protecting these young players because these are generational talents. And I don't say that lightly. And so you need to do what's best for their development. And B, what we saw in the second game was like an old U.S. mentality. It was high press. It was go, go, go. It was, we're going to put pressure on and we're not going to let up. And we're going to do that for 90 minutes. And I credit Twyla Kilgore with instilling that back into this federation.
No, 100%, 100%. And like you said, we do it in the UK all the time, in England, about having that mixture of veterans and new talent. And I'm going to say the two names again, but you look at Germa and Sauerbrunn. Germa grew so much by having that partnership with Sauerbrunn before Sauerbrunn's injury. And then you look at how she's flourished and is holding her own. But you need that veteran presence to calm her head and help nurture that talent. So I think what's happening now is great. And you know what? You might not go back into the Olympics and win it straight out again, but the building blocks are there for the USA to go back to where they were before. And I think that's great news for US fans.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I completely agree with the fact that the idea shouldn't be that we will go and win a gold medal in the Olympics because, again, we'll talk about head coaching in a second, but that feels almost impossible. We're 9 months out from the Olympics and we don't have a head coach that can look at this team and choose a formation and try different things. And it's just simply not possible. But I love what you said about Germa. And I think the reality is it's very player specific and it's position specific. And Naomi Germa happened to be in a place where she had a great club environment and she was being developed by Casey Stoney. And she was able to come into the national team and set foot on the field because she was paired with a Becky Sauerbrunn. To throw 3 young attacking players out and just let them figure it out, that's a lot. And I think the proof is in the pudding here. Sophia Smith and Mal Swanson, have been in the mix for a long time. And they're both still so young. I think that they're both still 22 years old, which is absolutely wild. And we're just starting to see them really come into their own. And I almost wish they'd been protected more than they have been so that they could be stepping onto the scene, not being so jaded, but coming into the scene right now, having been developed and with a ton of confidence. So these players are our future. And I think that I know you've lost faith in the process. I think we all lost faith in the process because we trusted Vlatko Andonovski's process and it failed. But have faith in the process. And that was my big takeaway from this game is there is so much good coming and we need to just be patient.
So the Athletic have reported that there are 3 coaches in contention to take the national team job. And so that is Tony Gustafsson, who is currently Australia's head coach, Laura Harvey, who's currently coaching the Reign, and Joe Montemuro, Arsenal's old coach, who's currently at Juve, who has no international experience. We'll get that out there now.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's an interesting bunch. There's not one that stands out to me. Tony Gustafsson was actually credited, he said publicly, but it was during the World Cup that he's got a great job with Australia, and he's happy there. But that was during the World Cup, so maybe things have changed. Laura Harvey has been in contention for a long time, and Joe Montemuro, while he's done a lot in club, We've never seen him in the international. So we will see either way. This is a really tough timeline for whoever takes on this role. And I hope that what they do when they take it on is look at the larger timeline to the World Cup and not just kind of do what Vlatko did and try to go in with a team that can win the Olympics, but puts you a year behind in terms of progressing towards that World Cup.
Yeah, I will just quickly say, if you're a US national team fan, you've got to be disappointed at that list. Like, I looked at it and I was like, okay, as much as I love Laura Harvey, and I do, I'm like, it's the same names being just like regurgitated and recycled, and there's like no new ideas, there's no fresh blood, there's nothing. So like, I saw that list and I was like,
I think that's a great point. I mean, and honestly, that points to the U.S. soccer coaching system not developing what it needs to develop. That's what it is. It's a failure in that pipeline.
Out of those three names, you're not going to get another Jill Ellis in terms of longevity. You know, it's going to be one that's, you know, you might get a couple of tournaments out of them if you're lucky.
Yeah, we'll see. To kind of like close this off, there's a few things, because other than the young talent, other than the head coaching, can we just quick hit some like notes from these games? Because Sam Coffey, I know I just went on a soliloquy about protecting the young talent, but you've also got to give him some minutes. Like, you got to give him some minutes. And Sam Coffey, look, this is no disrespect to Emily Sonnet, because Emily Sonnet has made a name for herself as the six. She is in a moment right now. I think Sonnet is a great answer, and I think she's been playing amazing. And also, I would have liked to see some Sam Coffey, and I would have liked to see her exist. Let's see how she looks as the sole six. We've seen how Sonnet looks as the sole six. Okay, let's see how Coffey looks as the sole six. What I really wanted to see was Coffey, Sonnet with Haran at the 10 in front of them. We got to see that a little bit, but not that much. I will say, though, credit to Savannah DeMello, who played so well that it was hard to adjust that lineup because it was working so well with her at the 10 and Haran at the 8 and Sonnet at the 6. And to finish on a final note, it was so great to see Sophia Smith back. And, when you think about the fact that this is what we had, and we get to add Mal Swanson and Katarina Macario to the mix when they're healthy, things are looking up, everybody. Let's go around the world. Around the world, around the world.
The Nations League is shaping up to be a hotly contested competition. We start with Germany. Finally, this team's luck seems to be changing. 5 goals against a very good Wales side this Friday. 4 different goal scorers, and the future's looking bright once again for this nation.
Over to Norway. Norway's woes, on the other hand, continue after another loss to a well-drilled France. Despite getting a goal back, the Nordic team are still far and away from looking their best.
The Netherlands. All headlines will be on Miedema's coming back. The praise must go to the team as a whole, however. Clinical against Scotland, winning 4-0. This goal fest now puts them atop their group.
And over to South Africa, a team currently working on their own Olympic qualification has come into some controversy. Janine van Wyk, who is currently 2 caps away from the all-time record, withdrew herself from camp after failing to be played in the first game against Democratic Republic Congo. Van Wyk is due to retire after the qualifiers, but is likely to postpone this to get the elusive caps. And we'll just say, we also did a segment in our last week's episode about how Jamaica, the Reggae Girls, are not playing in this break as a protest because they have not been paid.
Have you checked out Total Football Analysis yet? TotalFootballAnalysis.com provides researched analysis on loads of football, including the women's game. Want all the stats in one place instead of drowning in a mountain of tabs? Want to explore key matchups and the tactics from both teams? Total Football Analysis provides the stats and analysis to help you learn more about the beautiful game. We have a special discount for listeners of the Women's Soccer Show. At checkout, type WOSO10 to get a full year for just €10. That's €40 of the yearly subscription. Head over to TotalFootballAnalysis.com and type WOSO10 at checkout.
Over to England to talk about the Lionesses and Fran Kirby's return.
Yes.
Which I was very excited about. The Lionesses took on Belgium in 2 matches, the first of which ended in a 1-0 victory for England. The second of which is being played actually right after we record this, so we can't tell you, but you can Google it. So we are here to talk all things Lionesses. Allie, I hand the floor to you.
So the big thing, and I want to make this point out, and even Serena made this point out, is I think there's a lot of Lionesses fans that are disappointed that we took it 1-0. And I just want to say, guys, this new qualification system is set up to stop the rugby scores that we used to have. We are not playing teams that were like 70 points below us in the standings and it being a 20-0 bloodbath. We're not doing that anymore for good reason. And Belgium are good. Belgium are up there. They have got some insane players, like Everard, like Willard, like they've got some brilliant players. So you know what? A 1-0 victory is brilliant,
I mean, just saying that England fans have a short memory, if you guys are all upset about a 1-0 win, is like...
Mate, I was just like, if you could shake people through a computer screen.
Do I need to remind you guys that you barely made it out of the round of 16 in the World Cup? You made it out on pens. And if that doesn't set you right now for a second, listen, I understand, but short memory, oh my goodness. A 1-0 over Belgium is a win over Belgium.
Exactly. Like, good Lord. But anyway, so from that little rant over, I will say we had some great points. Our follow-up has improved. Hemp's goal came from, Everard saved Millie Bright's effort and Hempo was there to poach it, which we've not been very good at follow-up. We very much let the ball run. So, we're taking chances and chasing balls that we may not have chased before. So I'm seeing that as an improvement.
For me, I already mentioned it. My personal favorite, Fran Kirby is back. And I think a huge point about England going into the World Cup was how many pieces they were missing. And now we're seeing those pieces in the run-up to the Olympics slowly come back. We've got Mito back from injury, right? Now we've got Fran Kirby back from injury, and they're slowly piecing this back together.
Yeah, Leah Williamson is now training on grass for Arsenal. So, that's looking like it's coming back into the right formation. So I'm excited. We've got the tenacity again. We seem to have shaken off the World Cup loss, and we really are fighting for it, So I'm happy. And also, Mary Earps is forever and still on fire. Like, she kept us in the game because Belgium had some great chances and she made some insane saves. And I will say the shout out to the fans that you could hear every time she touched the ball, they were chanting, Mary, Mary, Mary. And how often does that happen for a goalkeeper? $100%. But as a Lioness fan, I'm happy. I'm happy with where we're at, and we can only go up, and we're doing well. And yeah, enough of the short memories.
From England, on to a few other matchups that we want to talk about, because we're not just going to touch on the US and England. We also want to talk about the Canada-Brazil matchup and, of course, the massive victory for Australia. Let's start with Canada versus Brazil, because, how many times do we have to say that this is one of our favorite matchups that could just ever exist? These teams, they know each other so well. They match up so well. It's just always an explosively fun game. Whether the scoreline shows it or not, it's physical. And these styles are so different, it's just fun to watch. So Canada versus Brazil. Obviously, I'm talking about the first matchup. These teams played each other twice. The second matchup, again, happening after the time of recording. But just to talk about this matchup for a second, I have to first start off with Canada and Christine Sinclair. We all know that she's retiring from international football. These are not her last matches. Her last two will be in December, and those are actually already sold out in Canada, which is a blast to hear.
I will say what I think is really sweet is that she got presented a jersey from like the local team with 12, her number, and they're actually retiring the number 12 in honor of the fans of the team because they're the 12th man. So that will be one of the last 12 jerseys that have been given out, which I thought was very sweet.
That's really wonderful. To stay on Canada, look, I don't know how this second game's going to turn around, but I really hope that they can turn it around for this second game. Canada is a team that has had a lot of the same players coming in, the same coach, who I think is a very talented coach, coming back. And they're playing a team in Brazil, which, you know, don't get me wrong, Brazil, as we've said many times, can beat anybody on any given day. But Brazil also is playing one of their first games ever with this brand new head coach after Pia Sundhage was released after the World Cup. And you would think that a team like Canada, who is set in their playing style, set in their formation, I would just say more locked in, playing a team like Brazil, who is arguably in the middle of learning a new formation or learning how their new coach works, learning a new style of play, could take it to Brazil a little bit more, and they didn't.
Yeah, that was the thing for me. It was like, we talk about how physical it is, how direct it is when these two teams play. I feel like Canada sort of like backed off a little bit more than they normally do. Didn't quite have the same tenacity. And it did look for a long time it was going to end 0-0, and that was where we're going to at. So, and then Brazil and Debinha pop up in like the 94th minute with beautiful goal, to be fair.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You can't argue it, but I do feel a bit for like Canada. You need something that's going to give you the rocket up to like bring yourself up there when it's not there.
It's funny that you say that, actually, because I think both teams are in that position where we thought that Brazil had that rocket in this World Cup and it didn't happen. And so now that's actually their missing piece. And maybe they found the coach to help them there and maybe they haven't. But both of these teams have the potential and they need something to elevate them.
Yeah. Over to the Tillies, Sarah's second team, and Australia.
My Tillies!
Yeah, my Tillies! And Australia took it 8-0 over the Philippines. It is an absolutely amazing result for Australia. And again, I would just say this little thing that Sam Kerr was talking about Mackenzie Arnold after the match. And she said back in the day, Mackenzie used to be able to get away from the stadium really quickly because no one really knew who she was, so she didn't have to do the autographs and stuff like that. Now she's the last one to leave because everybody is chanting her name, and it's just a beautiful thing to hear and see.
We were waiting for this, right? Because, you know, you see what happened in the World Cup, and then it's always the question of how does that continue? How does that carry over? And so far, so good. It has really carried over with these Matildas fans. And this was one of those, as you call them, rugby scores. But as expected, playing the Philippines, Australia is going to take on Chinese Taipei. Actually, today, as this episode is dropping. For me, the main takeaway from this is that Mary Fowler is still on the rise. And you love to see it because she had a great performance in the World Cup and she grew into that tournament. And you just don't want her to lose that momentum. And I would say it didn't look like she had in club. And I'm happy to see her come into the national team and just continue where she's at.
Yeah, and also I just want to quickly shout out the Filipino goalkeeper because it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a proper like 16-17-0 because Australia were just shot after shot after shot. And she, you know, preserved some dignity for the Philippines, and she was really good in the World Cup. Obviously, she helped them secure that historic win over New Zealand in the World Cup. So investment is all I have to say.
And I certainly hope that Caitlin Ford can take some of that scoring back to Arsenal. I'm going to add in that I had some Tim Tams the other day. I found them in a grocery store here. They didn't taste the same. I mean, they're still delicious, but something about them from Australia is just different.
So Australian fans, you know what you got to do. You got to send Sarah some Tim Tams.
We're not soliciting Tim Tams on the internet. All right, and we are back here with a special guest, Susie Cirilli, who I got the pleasure of being connected to through Women in Soccer. I want to give them a shout out. Susie, can you please tell the people what you do for a living? Because I was about to, and then I was just like, I don't know anything about law.
Neither do I. So I am a lawyer with the firm Plaster Greenberg. My specialty is labor and employment, and I also serve as external general counsel for clients.
Awesome. And I never said welcome to the podcast.
Thank
I know
you.
you're a listener. Thank you very much for joining us. We're really excited to have this conversation with you, which I realize now I haven't introed. This is probably the most chaotic intro we've really ever done.
Maybe I should have done it.
Yeah, well, we're going to keep it. We are here with Susie Cirilli to really dive in, if we can, to the topic of women's sports teams and real estate. And this has been, I would say, a hot topic for a long time, but I think it's been making the news more and more. And especially recently, I would say across both the WSL and the NWSL, and then as new leagues like the USL pop up, it's just everywhere, and it transcends everything within women's sports. I'm really excited to be talking about this with you. You don't just work in law, you also have a massive background in soccer. So you can tell the people what your soccer background is.
Yeah, no, so I grew up playing soccer, played in college, played at UVM, the University of Vermont. And then I coached through, summers of college to make some money. And then after law school, I coached a couple of teams in the Philly area. And then I realized I needed to focus on law. So I did. And now I'm back.
I love it. It's come full circle, as I think it does for everybody. So we're here to talk about women's sports teams and real estate. And we specifically got connected because we were both interested in this topic as a whole separately. And that's why we ended up chatting. So I haven't actually asked you directly, why does this topic of women's sports and real estate and the intersection of that interest you particularly?
So I think it's a bigger thing of women's sports and law in general that interests me, because I find that I've been practicing for a little over a decade, and the principles that we apply to our clients apply to soccer clubs. These clubs are all businesses, so each of them, and Allie, you can correct us, because across the pond they might do it a little differently, but here we have single entities that are their own. They don't have a men's club. It's just they're their own business. And so I'm finding that, like, when news pops up, whether it's an employment law issue, like what we saw with the NWSL with the Yates report, or whether it's a real estate issue, which we'll talk about later on, usually these things are not the results that the instances that occur, whether it's an unfavorable real estate situation or a hostile work environment. It's not random. It doesn't just happen over coincidence. And so what I'm finding is that whether it's an employment issue or a real estate issue, while there's no guarantees, there are ways to safeguard against an unfavorable result. So in the employment context, it's policies and procedures and training around sexual harassment, discrimination and the like. And for real estate, it would be, getting into the nitty gritty of a lease agreement, or if you're building, it's whatever, whatever real estate transaction you're working in under.
So recently, there have been some headlines around San Diego Wave and the new San Diego MLS team, around kind of like who's getting priority scheduling at Snapdragon Stadium where the Wave play. And I'm pulling the San Diego Wave thing out just because that's the most recent headline. But like you just alluded to, this has been a conversation in the WSL for a very long time in terms of priority scheduling in the club stadiums, or what people also refer to as the men's stadiums. So this is across the board, really. From your position as a lawyer, looking at this whole thing from the outside, what happened?
Right. Well, first, I have no clue.
Right. You haven't seen the contracts. You haven't seen anything.
So that's the end of the interview. I'm not involved with San Diego or the NWSL or anything. And I'm not barred in California. I have to say that. And so I'm just, but as an attorney. And so when I serve as GC, I've been involved in these types of like negotiations, but I always bring in my experts, right? So I have colleagues like Jennifer Johnson, Michael Stetman at my firm who would come in and do the real nitty gritty. But the high level principles that we always kind of tell our clients is that first things first, you can contract for anything. There are certain options you can embed in the document that you can exercise. Like, you have the first right to choose when matches will be played. You can even negotiate certain things like exclusive use. We will be the only women's football team to be playing in Snapdragon Stadium, which is probably pie in the sky. You can say we'll be the only football team operating in the stadium. Again, that's probably not going to happen, but you can ask or negotiate for anything. And my first thought, and I kicked it around with some colleagues in my office, to be candid with you both, is that when we, we circulate articles around and my firm, and when we were talking about this, the league and the game is growing so much. I have colleagues in my office that are fans of the MLS and Messi and all that, right? And then I'm obviously a fan of the women's games. And it's important for these clubs, when you're negotiating and when you're mapping out your leases, there's going to be competition coming into your market. And it's important to think about that as you enter into these transactions, because there are creative ways that you can maybe not totally safeguard against what just happened, like with an MLS team coming in, but it certainly might be able to get you on better footing to negotiate.
So let's just take a step back into let's dive into a fantasy world for a second, because I think where a lot of people get confused is like there's really no visibility into the process of setting up a soccer team, because when a lot of this stuff happens, it happens behind closed doors before they build a team, before they're fielding a team. So let's just step into a fantasy world and try to kind of dive into some of that so that maybe Allie and I and people listening can understand a little bit more of the setup and what goes into it. So let's say Allie and I are starting a football club and it's going to be in Atlanta. The first item on our agenda is that we want to decide where this team plays, whether that's the right item to be first or not. It doesn't matter. That's where we want to start. And we're going to decide between building or renting. It seems to me from the outside that building a stadium might be way more beneficial in the long run than renting. But when you think about the differences, there's actually positives and negatives to both.
It depends. That's the crappiest answer you'll get that's every answer you'll get from a lawyer. It really depends. So when we're sitting down with entrepreneurs like yourselves, what we like to say is, you tell me where you want to go. You tell us what you see. Like, do you see yourself staying in Atlanta? Do you see it as you want to be downtown? Or I do not know Atlanta at all. Where do you see yourselves? Do you see you packing the stadium? Do you see it as a family-friendly atmosphere? Do you see it as like a tailgating debaucherous weekend for everybody? And I say this because that's going to kind of dictate when you play, where you play, et cetera. Who can get there? Is there access to transportation, et cetera? So why don't we start with can we start off with maybe building a stadium?
Yeah, let's start there because I feel like that's what I'm partial to. I love what Kansas City's doing right now. To me, it seems in the long term, kind of like renting an apartment versus buying a house. Like if you can buy a house, it's probably better for you financially in the long run. Not everybody has that money to buy a house, but that's financially better. And maybe I'm placing that on top of, the world of women's soccer. And so maybe it doesn't, fit. Maybe it's a square peg, round hole. But it seems to me in that sense that in the long term, the clubs might benefit from building.
I tend to agree with you just because you have complete control over your house and what's going on. And so let's say we're building in Atlanta, the key is you cannot rely on this highly paid general counsel that you just hired in me, because what do we got to do? What do we have to do? We have to look at the location, and there are certain, like for instance, in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Union play in Chester, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of the city. I do not know the ins and outs of that, but I can imagine that there was a tax break because there are new market tax credits where you're investing in underserved communities that can benefit community, and it benefits, it's a tax break.
Mm-hmm.
So that can play into it wherever you are. There's also, zoning. So let's say we pick this awesome area. We don't have to pay taxes for 27 years, but we're going into a community that doesn't want it. It's going to increase traffic. And that's something that I would argue, it doesn't behoove you to bring in some big law firm. It behooves you to find that specialist, even if you do retain a big law firm, because zoning is a big issue and getting community buy-in is a big issue. And I believe that I'm sure Boston did something similar of the facility they're looking at or
I was just thinking Boston as you were talking about tax breaks and everything.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I don't know that for a fact,
right.
But it makes perfect sense. And then we're going to have our work cut out for us, because then there's situations, if you're working in a town like Philly or Boston, I don't know the landscape in Atlanta, but then there's labor, there's unions. So you want to find that specialist that knows how to deal with union work. And then if we're building, we need construction contracts. I mean, so what I'm trying to tell you, and then what you definitely need is a football/soccer expert.
I mean, so let's say we come to you in our, Atlanta fantasy world, and we're like, we want to build. You talk us through all of that, and we're like, you know what? That sounds like a lot.
There's a faff.
No, thank you. I think it's going to be faster to just rent. Can we talk through that line of, setup as well?
Yeah. So then same thing. Where do we want to be? Are we a family friendly atmosphere? Do we want people to come with their children?
Mm-hmm.
That means these games can't be, if they're during the week, they've got to be after school and when parents are home from work, right? Or do we want it to be like a tailgate? Like we're in Atlanta, we're going to just, beer pong or whatever, people want to tailgate. We got to look at liquor laws. Where can we sell alcohol? Where can we be? Then we work backwards. So what do we envision this being? And then how can we contract for it? So I think we start off with priority of match days. Give me your 10 greatest hits of what you want. We want to play on the weekends. Okay. We want to play afternoon on the weekends. Okay. Think about, so in Atlanta, or let's just say in this fantasy Atlanta, there's a Carolina Courage. There's no Atlanta team for the NWSL at least, right?
Correct. There is an MLS team, but maybe we don't want to rent from them because they'll get priority scheduling all the time. So we want to go somewhere else.
Right. But they might see what we're doing and we're selling it out every year. And I mean, every weekend, and they want in on our stadium. Right. So
Right.
we need to draft this contract with them in mind, with the USL's around, they're popping up everywhere. Right. So what can we do? So we can say, all right, when our term is up, we want first priority to renew. We want the right of first refusal. When you're saying, here's what the rent's going to be, we want to be the first party to say, no, we do not want that. Nobody else can get that. You can put that in the contract. You can also say, upon renewal, should there be other tenants, we get priority. I mean, you can put anything in these things. I mean, for the most part.
As a lawyer, is it just a matter of like, we're going to have to almost pick our battles? So what's most important to us? So if you're San Diego right now, and I don't even know when their contract is up. Let's say that their contract ends at the end of 2024, and then they have to kind of renew for 2025. Are they allowed to come back and say, actually, the first thing that we want here is priority scheduling, and you need to bump the MLS and give us whatever schedule we want, or we're out of here?
It depends on what the competitor's contract or lease agreement is. A great example of this, you two, is the Giants and the Jets. So, Allie, they're in New York. They're NFL teams. They both built the stadium and split the bill 50-50, and they're roommates. They've been roommates for a long time at this stadium, and they coexist. So, I mean, we are in the land of football. Soccer is growing. There might be a world, there probably is a world where all different leagues, whether it's men and women or women and women, need or will be cooperating. I mean, because ultimately, and this is what my colleague Michael and I were talking about today, is like the more, MetLife has 2 NFL teams playing there. The more successful these 2 teams are, the better we can take care of that facility, and everyone can coexist. So while we want to just dominate, maybe there's a world where they work together.
That's such a good point. I mean, not to continue on this US does it better, England doesn't, that we were teasing Allie about before we hit record, and I'll probably get a lot of trash for that. This is a benefit that leagues popping up here in the US have, women's leagues popping up here in the US have, because they can do something like that. Like, I hadn't even thought about, what if we just built a stadium together? What if the Atlanta, whatever MLS team, and Allie and Sarah's NWSL team or USL team build a stadium together? And Allie, I'm curious what you think, because kind of alike to how we talk about, there's some things about the WSL that are so great that we'll never get in this country because the WSL is attached to these bigger men's clubs. There's also equal downsides to it. And that feels like a downside, excuse me, because I don't see a world in which that club stadium will ever be seen as the club stadium and split equally between men and women, at least while we're alive.
No, it won't. I will point out a very quick thing in the fact that everybody tells me you can fit the United Kingdom 13 times in Texas. We do not have the space to have all of these like stadiums popping up, so we have to make do. As the game grows, then I do think eventually, but like you said, not in our lifetime, we will get, this is West Ham Stadium, and on the Saturday the men play, on the Sunday the women play, and it's that equilibrium. I just don't think at the moment we will get that, because At the moment, women's football's a loss. It's a loss of money that, regardless of where you play, what you play, it makes no money at the moment.
Mhm.
And the reason over here it's attached to men's teams is because they, especially Premier League teams, make so much money they can afford to write that loss off and invest that way. And so until it starts making its own money, it's going to forever be the little sister attached to Big Brother's team.
That's interesting. I keep thinking about, and I don't know the ins and outs of the WNBA, the NBA relationship, but it reminds me of that.
Yeah, very much so. And some people would say that that kind of puts a ceiling on where the WNBA can go and how they can be seen, because will they ever really be seen as their own entity? And I think that's a big question for the WSL. We've really gone into a different path. Susie, any closing thoughts before we let you go?
I think investing in a specialist to take care of these seemingly like mundane provisions of contracts is well worth it. And I'm not saying that as a plug for me. I'm not. I think though that knowing to spot the issue and to find that specialist, to review that lease or to review that term can pay off tenfold for the club. And so I would just, if there's one thing that you keep in this interview, it's worth investing while it's, don't pinch pennies in the beginning to save money. It's just going to screw you up later on. I really think that investing, there's all this rhetoric and talk about investing in women's sports. And if you can invest in hiring the right professionals, and I'm not saying hiring full time, solicit that local, zoning lawyer to help fight to get the stadium there, or, there's just ways that you can like every day invest. And instead of big picture, there's media rights, that's for the leagues to handle. Right. But then we got to make sure that that the players are on the pitch so everyone can watch them play. And I think that's like getting the right people in those offices to make those decisions and to know when they don't know and to hire the right person to tell them to help them out.
I love it. And that is it for us here at the Women's Soccer Show for this international break. It was too short. I wish we could do it again next week, but instead,
Absolutely not.
We've got NWSL playoffs, 2 games. The semifinals are here. The WSL is back. And you can head over to our Patreon, not only to catch the full unedited version of that interview you just heard, but also to hear our News in 10 episode, which we are talking about the Ballon d'Or. So head on over to our Patreon for that. And for us here at the Women's Soccer Show, I've been Sara.
And I've been Allie.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
This podcast was edited by Monkey Hill Media. Visit monkeyhillmedia.com for more information.